In this recording, we're going to go through a brief history of television in unscripted formats. Don't be scared by the length of this. It really is brief. There's just so much to go over. I'm going to do this as a playlist so that you can just click next to see video examples without copyright issues of me embedding them. So it's going to be easier if I set this up as a YouTube playlist. We'll go through some things. I'll stop this recording, throw it in the playlist, the video to take a look at, and move on. But before we even dive into that, I want to go over a little bit of why do we even care about this medium. I'm sorry, guys, you're going to hear this from me a lot. So storytelling as a means of communication, a means of teaching, a means of instruction, those are synonyms, but of forming people, it's been around since the beginning of time. It's how we transmit information and tell our stories of humanity, salvation, where the fish are so that we can eat. It's a treasured medium. Binghamton University in spring 2014, it was the cover stories. Not why we like stories, not why we love stories, but why we need stories. We have 5,500 years plus of written stories, more than that if you think about stories communicated on cave walls with paint, the visual mediums. And they're still vital. In the modern era, they're everywhere. Yes, still in print. Print isn't dead just because other mediums exist. But beyond that, we have storytelling in, of course, film and television. Now, there is such a power to storytelling and our craving for stories. There is a reason why Jesus used parables to teach. He didn't just tell people exactly what things are. So we look at our maker, we look at our creator, our savior. He taught in parables. He taught in stories. It's how we form our minds, moral compass, our moral conscience, our empathy, our creativity. One of the things that I frequently say is if you want to tell somebody why they're wrong, make it be in a story 2,000 years in the future on Mars. We can separate a little bit of ourselves and actually self-evaluate better when there is some distance, and that's part of that power of storytelling. We can also enter worlds we never imagined. Think about some of the films that have come out recently and some of the horrific situations that they deal with. I personally, for some reason, really like watching films about the Holocaust because I think we can so easily forget what really happened, and we have to be reminded of some of the worst of human nature and what can happen so that we recognize it in ourselves and it doesn't expand and grow, and so that history doesn't repeat itself. It's also a way through stories, like I can't imagine what it would be like in a concentration camp, but a movie well done can help me live in the shoes a little bit and have some empathy, some idea, so the creative juices in my mind can flow and I can think about what it may have been like and make sure that those situations don't repeat and I'm not a part of it. So beyond empathy, we have this metaphor and experience and cultural connection. It's also said that film and television can be seductive. It's this mirror into yourself and you get hooked on it. In the modern era, it fills the gap leading to philosophy. People learn philosophies and worldviews from the media they watch. So we have a power as the creators of what do people see. It's also used to transcend yourself, to go above. I actually took a whole class called Transcendence in Film. It was one of my favorite classes about how people are using television and film for transcendent experiences. And that 20 years ago could easily be said for a transcendent experience of going to the movie theater. You go in, you get in a dark room, a whole new world is shown to you where you transcend your normal reality, and it's a shared experience with all these people. Today, we're getting much more into individualized media transmission, and especially post-COVID movie theater experiences are dwindling, but it's the same experience. And there is actually some far deeper, I would say, negative transcendent experiences that are going on in terms of the neurological firings in the brain of certain addictions that can be triggered by visual media. Pornography This is, check out fightthenewdrug.com. Great information. But it's invasive. And it leads to so many problems in our culture. And pornography primarily begins as a visual storytelling business. People are using film, television, media to get out of their normal lives and transcend, even though we think of transcendence normally in a positive way, because it should be transcend and be better, to be closer to God. But they're also using it to just escape. So I am a statistic nut. There are 3 links that you should really check out. I'm going to go over a couple things on this. Right now, I think our current breakdown on viewing platforms is over 50% on streaming, but there's a link where you can see whenever you're looking at this what the current breakdown is of where people are watching their media. The average person on crazy statistics about media viewership, with the amount of television they watch, the average American will have spent 15 years of their life watching television by the time they die. Think about that. Digital media, in a study in 2022, had 439 minutes. Traditional media, 293 minutes. So that's a total of 732 minutes, 12.2 hours, right? So over half of the 24-hour cycle of the day was spent with media. Now, that does include multiple media sources. So if you're working on a computer or you're reading articles online and you're listening to the radio, both of those times would count. That's why it can be quite so high, but it shows the different amount of media inputs we get. Now, let's contrast that. 6 in 10 Americans pray or participate in prayerful activities. Okay, so only 60% report that they pray or participate in prayerful stuff. There's 18 minutes on average for those who pray. So taking that 60%, that's 10.8 minutes average across the population. So the average American spends 175 minutes a day watching traditional television, at least. So that's 16.2 times as much time as watching traditional television as praying. The lowest demographic group said 2 hours and 55 minutes for their average amount of time. So it's pretty insane, those numbers of how much time is spent with television versus how much time is spent in prayer. And that's traditional television. That's not counting film, music, streaming platforms, YouTube, traditional broadcast television. So sorry, the lowest demographic group is 2 minutes and 55 seconds, I think. It's been a while since I looked at the study. Either way, it's crazy, guys. Television is still exceedingly pervasive, and we're going to narrow in on television now for the rest of this. So, as Christians, I feel like we have a responsibility to proclaim the kingdom of God in every way we can. From Matthew 5:14 through 16. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Your light must shine before people in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. We do this in a couple of ways in television as creators. By what we make, by how we treat the people who make it, by how we treat the people who invested in it and are trusting us with it, and by how we treat the viewer who is going to end user receive this. So try to take some time and think about that at some point this week. Why do we care about the history and studying this? From Cheryl Antonio, which is a quote in the book Producing for TV and Emerging Media. My camera is blurring it out. But Producing for TV and Emerging Media. You can't be cutting edge or do anything new if you don't know what came before. You have to be curious about how things worked years ago, how they work in other countries, what traditions and formats were used, and why. Being informed is being serious about what you are doing. We've got to learn from the past, guys. We can't just say, oh, look, it's going to be brand new. I have seen quite a few proposals of something that's brand new. No one's ever thought of this before, but really So here's a bit of an overview of the technical evolution that was necessary for television. In the late 1920s, electronic TV developed. There's a couple different people who developed different versions. 1926, NBC was formed. The first broadcast was in 1928 of Felix the Cat. Then in 1927, CBS had their first broadcast of 1929 Spectacular. Now, they were going along doing their thing for a while, and then in 1934, the government said, ooh, the airways are just like this Wild West, and if people are making money on this, we better regulate it. So they formed the Federal Communications Commission to regulate and issue licenses for people using the airways for profit. 1936, coax cable was invented. So fine, you're going to regulate our airways. Let's find another way to transmit information. It's not all it was behind coax cable, of course. It also helped in remote areas, and there were lots of reasons for coax to get invented, but then NTSC, National Television System Committee, popped up and created standards by 1941. How does all this stuff work? It's first the wild, wild west, right? We see this with streaming. It's wild, wild west, everybody trying to do what they can to make it work and make money, and then standards start happening and regulation. So let's look at this kind of explosion and the timeline. By 1939, 40,000 homes had televisions. 1941, commercial TV versus experiential was a big question. The commercial TV that was for profit and starting to get into advertisements. 1943, the FCC said no company could own more than one network. So the first anti-monopoly laws for television. So it was 15 years from the very first broadcast on television till some really hardcore regulation came into place. So we'll come back to that in a minute. So in 1942 to 1945, of course, World War II was going on. So manufacturing pretty much ceased of new TVs and radio sets. Then the war ended, and there were all kinds of technological advances continuing. In the 1950s were like the golden age of television, is what you'll hear it called. It's a coming of age of this, of the medium-based technology, right? So ad revenue was happening, cross-country was run across, the cables were run across the country and into the rural areas. And then you had the network system with the big three, NBC, CBS, and ABC, and they were fighting for market share. 1956, videotape was invented. It's actually older than I realized. In 1960, at home, 90% of homes had television sets. So from 40,000 sets in 1940 to 90% of homes was huge. This was a cultural boiling point, not boiling point, but it just a coming together. It was a melting pot where you have these three networks, NBC, CBS, and ABC, speaking to 90% of homes. You've got the TV dinner evolutions. And in 1964, RCA's color system was approved. There were a couple fights over color systems, but now you have color television. In the 1970s, television started to address social issues, and the VCR came home so people could record things to watch later. There was also the family hour of 7 to 8 p.m. where television was focused on family-friendly programming. Television dinners, watch your TV from 7 to 8 together. In the 1980s, youth marketing really struck. Instead of it being television for children and parents, it was now for these teenagers, right? MTV in 1981. I want my MTV. Even more on social issues. You look at a lot of racism was addressed a lot in the 80s. A lot of different social issues got addressed on television in the 80s that hadn't been addressed thoroughly before. And you also got into independence. It wasn't just the big three networks anymore. 1990s, we move into more digital television created and a lot more real-time reporting, which had a huge impact on actual world happenings, because wars were no longer something you heard reported about later. They could actually be influencing the outcome of current events because of people's television reporting in real time. So continuing on, in the 2000s, 25% of Americans under 24 got news from The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. I just think that's hilarious. 25% of Americans under 24. Now today, I'm not sure what the number is, but I think it's far higher for how many in that age bracket get their news from social media. It's also the reality TV programming explosion in the 2000s. And over-the-top streaming. This is on-demand streaming. 2005, YouTube. 2007, Netflix and Hulu. 2013, Netflix started doing original programming. 2014, Netflix won their first Emmys. 2015, Uscreen, and there's a ton of them now, but Uscreen is a, hey, you want your own streaming platform? We can do the technology for you. They launched in 2015, and they now have over 5,000 channels. They've actually now changed their name to Memberships and Memberships Plus, and a lot of coaches are using Uscreen for their content that you have to pay for the membership. And the streaming wars are going on now between different streaming conglomerates. We also now have new formats, right? Vertical, interactive, extended reality, shorts, transmedia with multiple formats referencing each other. I'm seeing more and more crew jobs posted where they're looking for vertical content creators, which is just a totally new phenomenon. Now let's look a little more at those social issues, right? What's going on in the world as TV is evolving and how does TV interact? In the 1940s, you had war broadcasts. Some of them were informational, of keeping people up to date with what's going on in the war. They were also comic relief from stress of war in television programming. So you saw a lot of sillier broadcasts and very Life is Wonderful type shows. In the late 1940s, mostly public viewing type projects. 1950s were the start of the exploitive game shows like Queen for a Day. We'll get more into that later. The 1960s are considered the first television society, with 90% of homes with television in them. In the 1970s, there were 30 shows that were canceled and replaced. Then you started getting into the shows like All in the Family, Mary Tyler Moore, MASH, more social justice oriented shows dealing with social topics instead of just the I Love Lucy's of the world. The 1980s, MTV evolved, and then you had shows that are getting into more issues like The Cosby Show, A Different World, The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, In Color. There was a lot more diversity in programming in terms of who was in front of the camera in the 80s. So a little bit in politics, we're looking at how all these things juxtapose, right? All these things are going on, but we can look at each one in its own lens. In 1952, you had the first political ads for Stevenson and Eisenhower in that election. Stevenson went for 18 30-minute time slots. Eisenhower went for 20-second spots before and after popular shows. We know how that worked out. In 1952, Cronkite, a news journalist, is considered the most trusted man in America. 1960, Nixon and Kennedy. Radio, this is really interesting, what the difference is with the visual versus just the auditory of getting to see someone. Same debates. Radio listeners said that Nixon won debates. Television viewers said Kennedy won debates. So based on voice, they thought Nixon won. Based on voice and visual, they thought Kennedy won. So it shows that difference that adding on the visual makes. In 1963, 96% of Americans watched Kennedy's funeral. 96%. That is huge for everyone to be watching the same thing at the same time. In the late 1960s, Vietnam, a super televised war. Moving on to emerging technology comparison, I think this is really interesting. A radio set in 1920, so as radio was emerging and becoming a home item, it was $150 and the average income was $3,269.40. So 4.6% of your annual income went to buy a radio set. In 1948, a TV set, as people are getting all their TVs. 1940, remember, there were 40,000 in households. By 1960, the numbers had worked out that 90% of homes had televisions. But in 1948, as TVs are really emerging for home, it was $500, and the average income was actually lower, $3,200. So that was 15.6% of an annual income. Apple Vision Pro in 2003 was $3,499, and the average income $56,940. So a little bit closer to the radio set proportion of 6.1%. Something I think is really fascinating to think about. How much do people spend to be part of these emerging technologies? Now, regulation and self-regulation. Television, in many ways, is more of an evolutionary descendant of radio than of film. Radio was broadcasting, television was broadcasted. Television just used some of the technology of film to also broadcast visuals. But a lot of the infrastructure within studios evolved more from radio than from television. Likewise, a lot of the regulation evolved more from radio than television. So radio, introduced in 1906, regulation began in 1912, so 6-year gap. Television was first broadcast in 1928, and regulation really began in 1943, 15 years. OTT streaming began in 2007, and the first real self-regulation were the union and guild strikes in 2023, beginning over, hey, you can't keep calling this emerging media, it's got 50% of the market share. So it took 16 years for that big regulation push to begin. Again, something to think about. All right, unscripted milestones. So what we're specifically talking about are those shows that are based off reality in some way, be it documentary or reality television. They're based on real people, not actors, actors are real people. They're based on people portraying themselves. So let's look at the history of unscripted. So the first unscripted show actually started as a radio show, and that was Queen for a Day. Kind of a creepy show. I will include a clip to this. I actually think I'm just going to put at the end of this playlist all of these different shows so you can go through all this, then watch them, because some of them are pretty long and you may want to click through them. Anyway, not sure yet, but we'll see. But Queen for a Day was a show that took people to tell their sad stories of why their life was so bad in front of an audience, and people would vote on whose story was the saddest to give them something. There was also a lot of product placement, because it was often, oh, your life is going to be made better by this new dishwasher. It was a long-running show, guys. 1945 in radio, 1947 it started on local TV, 1956 to 64 was on NBC and then ABC. So a long time the show was going, really from 1945 to 1964. Amateur hour, people showing off their talents. Again, started as radio, 1934 to 45 on radio, 1948 to 1979 on television. Candid camera, the world of smile, you're on camera, you know. It started in 1947 on radio, where people didn't know they were being recorded. It's a lot better thing on visuals. On 1948 to 1979 was its full run. And then from 1980 to 2014, there'd be random short runs of the show. An American Family was a PBS documentary looking into the life of a family. That was in 1973. So that's your kind of docu-soap, documentary miniseries type first reality television show that was a look into this family's life. America's Funniest Home Videos, that had user-generated content, so very much a precursor to our YouTube phases. It was 34 seasons running. It's only had 1 year off air since 1989, and they keep rotating through and going, right? Fun fact, I was actually on America's Funniest Home Videos when I was like 10 years old. I submitted a video of me jump roping with my dog. I actually never got to see it air. I submitted it, never heard anything back, and then I got a call. I just saw you on America's Funniest Home Videos. So I too was part of America's Funniest Home Videos. Real World. This is what a lot of people think of as the start of reality television, because it's that 1992 kickoff of the reality TV craze, with the interviews taken aside with people talking about how much drama there is with everyone else, and is it scripted, is it not scripted. Real World had 33 seasons from 1992 to 2019, MTV's show, and they've been trying to reboot it on Facebook Watch, actually. House Hunters. Now, this is a bread and butter type show for entry-level film and television students. It's been going since 1999 to present. 239 seasons. And this was last year I did this research, so it's more than that now. They had 1,772 episodes and counting, 25 million viewers per month. Now, the way this is generally shot is 3 days of filming. And it's usually a 3-person crew, producer, camera, and sound. So the producer flies in and they hire a local camera operator and sound mixer and knock it out. So talk about cheap to produce content. 3 production days with 3 people. And of course you have pre-production and post-production, but they have their formula, right? They're still interviewing people. They're still talking about their real story of finding a house. They just do it in a little bit, remember when you were looking at houses way, because they're not going to actually go with you to look at 30 different houses. So they start filming after you've already selected the house, but then you go through and look at that house and look at other houses, and they recreate what happened in your experience. Really smart format for churning out a ton of content. And people are obsessed with house hunting, so they love it. There are 17 direct spin-offs from the original House Hunters. The research I've done is cost is about $45,000 to $50,000 per episode, so very cheap to produce television. Now let's look at the Osbournes, 2002 to 2005, and this kind of shows the shift to celebrity. Some of the reasons that celebrities are great to use is, well, they tend to be pretty crazy people, and they already come with an audience. That's really the biggest reason. People will watch not because of the great plot, but because they're interested in the Osbournes. I want to see Ozzy Osbourne's life. So celebrities started getting used more after the smash success of the Osbournes. The Bachelor, we've got extreme dating show. Not the only dating show, but this is the one that really took the cake on reality television dating shows. And part of that is how the creator has turned it into international. So extreme dating show, I would say this is a great example of glorifying immorality with some of the behavior in the show. Dives into deeply personal decisions. So going into that escapism that people have, they're watching somebody else's deeply personal decisions. But this thing is spin-off central, man. There are so many spin-offs to The Bachelor, and there are international licensing of The Bachelor and then international versions where it's basically wash, rinse, repeat, but with the cultural norms and languages and accents in another country. And he has done a great job of repackaging and reselling this. Real Housewives. Now we're getting into the very scripted type reality television, the soap opera reality. It's a highly produced style and sensationalized, it preyed on the sensationalized attraction to lifestyles of the rich. There could be discussions all day long about how much of this is scripted. I have not and hope I never will work on an episode of this, so I don't have insider information for you guys, but it's that attraction to the rich and soap opera reality style, and that's been 2006 to present. Alone. I think this one is interesting. This isn't a particularly huge milestone, but there is an entire branch of reality television of life in the outdoors, Naked and Afraid, Bear Grylls, the crocodile hunter, this outdoors, sit on your couch, eat your potato chips, and watch other people get outside reality television that I just think is fascinating. Alone is interesting to me because it is self-filmed survival competition show. The people are dropped off, 10 people dropped into the wilderness with cameras to film themselves, some survival gear, and a GPS that warns them if they're too close to another contestant. They have to check in every day to make sure they're alive, and they've got a tap out button. So I think this one's interesting because of the mix of content styles. If you watch the show, you'll notice there's definitely times when the people are recording themselves and you can see them talking and it's in the moment. Then there is a lot of B-roll with voiceover, and I am so sure most of that voiceover is recorded in interviews with producers and then plugged in. They probably do a round of editing and then bring people back in if they need them to narrate something and record it in addition to other interviews. They also have the get to know them packages in this show, the see what the people were like before they came on the show. Why are they on the show? And then they've got everything from GoPros and cameras with a lav to them that the people have to mic themselves up. So prosumer kind of cameras to time-lapse sliders and drone photography for the other B-roll shots. And they use night cameras to see what animals come near their site. So there's a ridiculous amount of footage that gets processed that gets into the role of story producer and how much work is required to be a story producer. And safety concerns. They always had a base camp nearby, so they were monitoring people's safety and doing safety checks. That all said, there are people who have gotten hurt on the show. There are people who have done damage to their bodies from extreme starvation and cold. This gets into the balance of what is okay for spectacle and entertainment and competition, and what is okay for people to choose they want to do it, and what do you as a producer say, no, we're not doing this to a person. Likewise for your crew, what will you put your crew through? There's also been some discussion on this show if the contestants had to be paid as camera operators by union regulations because they were technically operating their cameras. So I'm not sure where that resolved, but there's kind of a buzz that that's been a question, that these guys might be secretly being paid in addition to the prize money as camera operators because they're filming themselves. Forged in Fire. This is a mix of a competition show with history. There are a lot of these shows out there, guys. Highly formulaic. There's a competition. There's some information thrown in. People compete, they win something, or they just get bragging rights. It's an easy to reproduce format. So there were 10 seasons of Forged in Fire, which is a forging show, right? Just forging competition show. There are so many formulas out there of competitions. Now, what happened around this time when Is It Cake in 2022? I think it's actually still on now, but at least 2022 and 2023. I use this in our timeline to represent the switch to just stupid, silly, feel-good reality television. There was a surge in feel-good television in this time frame in response to COVID. Return to game show formats, return to just absolutely ludicrous, silly things like, is this object cake or not? How well can people bake these things? And The Floor is Lava, taking a children's game and turning it into a competition show. That's unscripted, guys. You're not watching the entire time the people are crossing the lava floor, right? It gets edited. And which camera gets used. All of these editing techniques are unscripted techniques. So yes, The Floor is Lava. I also want to bring up on The Floor is Lava, two things I think are fun. It utilized an old IKEA building. I just think that's a cool fun fact. And Netflix has historically had this 3-season rule. So it's going to be interesting to see what happened to some of these shows. A lot of show contracts with Netflix have, if you make it to season 3, you get paid a lot more to make your show. So a lot of them don't make it there. or I forget if it's after season 3. Season 4, you get a lot more money. It's one of the transitions, either from season 2 to 3 or 3 to 4. So you see a lot of them end at that point because Netflix does not want to go that way. An important consideration in unscripted formats is what's going on for the person who is on this show. There actually was a real life Truman Show kind of show in Japan in 1998. Sensunu Denpa Shoen. Anyway, Nasubi was the character in this. He was won a competition to be able to be in a competition, and when he won that, he got to be in a room and take off all his clothes and be filmed straight for 15 months. They put an eggplant over his private parts as a graphic, but it was basically unedited streamed. There were edited down episodes, but they also had a basically live stream component. It was Japanese torture reality. In the final episode, when he wins the prize and the walls of his little house are undone, he's in front of a huge studio audience and he's just shell-shocked. He's really not sure what's going on. So this raises a lot of questions about what can and should a producer do, even if they have a signed release form saying they can do it. So in the YouTube playlist, I put a clip of that final when he wins the challenge in front of a live studio audience. There's a PBS documentary series actually on human spectacle, and they delve into this. So that's linked. There's also a link in Vimeo where you can see the first episode. All right, so where are we today in this unscripted world? There is even more bandwidth and craziness as streaming expands, YouTube expands, and cable continues to grow. There were 559 unscripted shows in 2021. There were an estimated 2,000 total shows that had existed by the year 2020. In 2020, 32% of content was unscripted on streaming networks. And I've got some links where you guys can check out some more reality TV statistics to go deeper. Now, the big thing is for you watching this and thinking about what am I going to do with this degree is there are huge opportunities for unscripted. The shoots are everywhere because they go where the subjects are. For the most part, there are some that are certainly shot in hub cities and they bring talent there. There are generally lower entry rates, which means your pay rate is lower, which means the people who take them are more likely to be willing to take an entry-level rate. There are increasing creative funding opportunities for unscripted shows because of the lower production costs. You can get started a lot more inexpensively than for other shows. Flip side thought, the competition with these lower rates and evolving technology keep driving budgets down even with the strike going on last year and through the beginning of this year. You can read a Deadline article on that to go deeper, and I'll upload these slides for you guys too in Canvas. Last thought on this before I show you guys all these different videos. While you think about this and what kind of show would I make, right? As you're thinking about what are your projects going to be? Of course, the most important thing is what is interesting to you and what are you passionate about and what do you have knowledge about, especially for creating something in a class context. But if you're looking at this really to make a show and work on developing a show that is going to move forward, the ways you can follow the money are look at what's getting funded, right? What are the network mandates? Networks put out what they're looking for pitches. Does it make sense to self-produce something and crowdfund it, which includes things like YouTube viewers? Branded content. A lot of reality unscripted television is funded by product placement and branded content. Brenton Productions basically buys space on Motor Trend Network and embed their own commercials. Real Screen Summit is a place where projects get pitched and picked up. They're meeting actually in Orlando this year. I'm going to try to make it down there myself. And I got a list for you guys of the power players in 2023 you can check out. But the big things are keep working your way up. Keep working. Get on sets. Get working. and network with people so they know who you are and can move forward. All right, I hope this was useful. Enjoy checking out those examples, and we'll keep going forward.